It was really quite stunning, and it was thanks to 8 Republicans who broke with him, along with the entire Democratic conference in the House. Now, we didn't know when this was going to happen necessarily. We know that Congressman Matt Gaetz, who was the conservative Republican who had been pushing for McCarthy to leave, he'd been calling for this for quite some time, particularly over the weekend after McCarthy struck a deal with Democrats to keep the government open. However, he called for that motion to vacate the chair. Those 8 Republicans broke with McCarthy. They say it's because they feel that McCarthy hasn't governed conservatively enough and that he hasn't kept his promises. Democrats say that they voted against him because they feel that they can't trust him, even though it's a given that the two sides won't necessarily see eye to eye on politics.
Yeah. It was interesting that the Democrats didn't back him, given that he had made every effort to try and keep the government open.
Yes, but I think a lot of Democrats, they'll point to some other they've pointed to some other incidents with McCarthy. For example, after January 6th, 2021, when McCarthy first talked about how it was wrong what former President Trump did and condemned the actions of him, seemingly tying him to the attacks. But then a few weeks later, flew down to President Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago to meet with him and has worked with him since. Also on Sunday morning and over the weekend, you did see McCarthy sort of throwing jabs at Democrats, despite the fact that he worked with him. So they say that there's a lack of trust. And overall, I think there's this general consensus on Capitol Hill, at least from some observers, that McCarthy, even though he's well liked by many Republicans, he definitely tells people, whether they're Republican or a Democrat, what they want to hear in the moment. But there's this criticism that he doesn't necessarily keep his promises.
Yeah, and over promises, which is probably what got him in trouble. Who are his likely successors? Who would even want the job?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We've heard, a few names floated. Congressman Steve Scalise, who is in Republican leadership, he has been floated for the job, and he reportedly has been talking to other Republicans about this. You've heard some other names floated, but overall, looking at how McCarthy was able to navigate this and, what happened in his eventual downfall, I think a lot of people are pretty pessimistic about what happens going forward.
Yeah. And, Julia, for us in Australia, does it literally mean the government cannot operate at this point without a speaker?
No, it doesn't mean the government can't operate, because we know that the executive branch, which is controlled by the President Biden, and those federal agencies, that's obviously still open. The Senate is still open for business, but right now the House is in a state of paralysis. They are still there. They're still they're still present. But in terms of what direction they move in, that's sort of the big question.
Yeah. At the same time, we've got these two court cases playing out that will play into politics too. Donald Trump again in court for the second day of his trial regarding his estimated assets. The judge slapped a gag order on him, which is kind of no surprise. In recent weeks, his language is becoming increasingly violent on several fronts.
It's no surprise. We know that Donald Trump is not one to keep quiet. He is very much one to take to social media. This time it was to Truth Social, his own social media platform, and, directly attacking members of the judge's staff. So, I would think, or, any sensible person would think Donald Trump knew exactly what he was doing and what the consequences could be when he did that. But look, I think when you watch Donald Trump this week in court, he's been angry. He has so many legal issues stacked up against him as he's running for president. He's still the Republican frontrunner. He's, on track to win the nomination. But I would imagine that having to be in court and dealing with this is certainly, sort of taking his attention away from the campaign trail, and he's going to have to multitask there.
Indeed. Also, Hunter Biden, he faced court. He pleaded not guilty to owning a gun while a drug user. Now, again, another first. He's the first child of a sitting president to find himself indicted and in court answering charges.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the split screen this week between former President Trump and President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, arriving in court. Now, he was, dealing with a prosecutor in court this week, or was appearing with a prosecutor who earlier this summer, at least this summer here in this hemisphere, was looking to make a plea deal with him. But now Hunter Biden faces potentially 25 years in prison. Now, we don't know if that will actually happen. I think that's more of a worst case scenario, but finger pointing from both sides of the aisle on this. Republicans say that Hunter Biden hasn't been treated harshly enough and that there's a double standard, whereas Democrats say that any normal American charged with this offense wouldn't face this type of penalty.
Yeah. Oh, Julia, I hope you get through the day. There's so many twists and turns. Great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Bev.